You're listening to Biotech Hangout, a live and unedited weekly discussion of all the latest news in our industry, as well as random stuff we want to talk about. I'm Josh Schimmer. My co-hosts today are Eric Schmidt and Tess Cameron. So we got the Skeleton crew in August. For more information about our hosts and guest speakers, or to listen to the most recent episode, and for disclosures regarding the companies we cover, please go to biotechhangout.com. As a reminder, none of what we say should be construed as investment advice, because anyone who's ever tried investing in biotech knows just how very hard and volatile it can be. Tess, by the way, I caught up with I had a great introductory call with the RA Capital Planetary Health team.
Oh, I
Really,
love that. I'm so
really
glad.
interesting. Yeah, very interesting initiative now moving beyond biotech to invest in companies that are good for planetary health, thinking about sustainability, energy sources, and optimization. Really, really fascinating effort. So kudos to the RA Capital team for making that pivot and really trying to make a difference on a planetary basis. So very, very, very important, and hopefully we'll hear a lot more about that group in the months and years to come. But we're going to kick things off now. That's not so much biotech. Let's talk about some of the latest updates. The big one, Vinay Prasad is back. Eric, good, bad, neither?
Oh boy, okay. Just the latest chapter in quite the saga here. Look, I guess one thing you just have to say is that Dr. Makary really, really, really wants him there, right? I mean, I think most of us felt when he left 2 weeks ago, it was for good reason, that there was just too much going on, too much havoc, too much chaos, too much drama, and yet he's back. Great point, a great piece from Stat News this week that maybe provides some advice to Dr. Prasad on his way back to the agency on how he might be able to do things with a little less drama. So hopefully everyone has seen that. But my take is that these two leaders are joined at the hip, that Dr. Makary pushed very hard and very aggressively to bring him back, despite some of the political headwinds that he may have faced, and he got his wish. So we're going to have these two guys running the agency. That's pretty clear, and we can cross our fingers and hope for the best. Obviously, there's a lot of things that could potentially be at risk with regard to drug regulation and approval processes in the U.S. and we all need, I think, to get behind these two and hope they can do the job as best they can and maybe support them. So good, bad, and different, Josh? I don't know. I mean, I think we both feel that these two individuals are really, really bright and really capable and certainly engaged. I hope that they've learned a few lessons in their first 6 months on the job, and like all of us, they can get better at it.
Yeah, Tess, what do you think, and how are you at RA Capital, like, if at all, reacting to some of the leadership changes at the FDA as you think about your investments and portfolio?
Yep, absolutely. Look, I think that we are really looking to actions as an indicator for what could happen in the future. I thought it was really, really interesting. Just, it's only a short time since, Prasad has been back. We know that he's very actively involved in approvals. Precigen's drug, got approved, right? This is a drug for a small patient population, a kind of, disease caused by persistent, HPV. And this got approved on a pretty small trial. It got full approval, and I thought it was really interesting in the FDA press release. There is this quote from Dr. Vinay Prasad saying, "Randomized trials not always needed to approve medical products, and this approval is proof of that philosophy. The FDA will always demand the correct clinical study for the specific medical product and disease. Our requirements for products given to tens of millions of healthy people will be different than products given to at most hundreds or thousands of patients with unique diseases." So, I think we can all kind of look at past, statements and, uh, you know, uh, and behaviors, and maybe wonder like what the heck is going to happen. I think that it's really important to see. Obviously, that statement that Dr. Prasad was making was not unique to the Precigen case example. So I hope that we get more examples and more, more details on, just how, approval pathways may be evolving and changing. I thought that was, very interesting, especially when contrasted, to some of the other, regulatory decisions that have maybe, occurred earlier this year, where there was a little, less clarity on why things didn't get approved. So.
So PDUFA dates have always been marginal at best in terms of risk reward, right? You rarely get paid to the upside to a meaningful degree for approval. That maybe that's changed a little bit lately, actually, interestingly. But in the event of a non-approval, the result can be relatively catastrophic. So with the new administration, one might think that the risk reward of PDUFA dates has even further deteriorated. Tess, from an investor lens, how do you kind of think about those binary events and navigating them?
Yeah, I mean, it really, it really depends. I mean, obviously, Precigen is up dramatically because people were not anticipating that approval would really happen, and it did. So, I think it is harder to gauge, but in a way that like it's harder to gauge means that the risk reward into an approval, if you think that you have a different view than the market, what does the market know now about like, I think for these maybe grayer cases where it's a little less clear if like approval is baked in or not. I think there, in some ways, is a little bit more of a discontinuity on approval, right? I'd point to Urigen as another case, right, where there was a pretty, I would say, dramatic advisory committee, bit of a mixed vote, and the company, kind of navigated FDA interactions after that, and got approved, and I think the stock didn't move a whole lot on approval, but certainly moved, actually it did, move quite a bit just before approval after they hired some reps. And then I think, kind of on approval and then, quite a bit afterwards. So it's interesting in some ways, the uncertainty that's being injected into any company that has an open label trial or, a smaller sample size or, didn't have the perfect control arm. If you think you have a differentiated view, maybe there's, actually a bit more of a move on the approval for those medicines. Different case for something where approval is really baked in and expected, and where it would be, stock if, a shock if it weren't. And that's, I think that's the case for Insmed and brensocatib, and I think that's why we didn't see this, huge, kind of reaction to the day.
So I guess it kind of dovetails into a related topic around binary events. Certainly PDUFA dates can be very binary events. Eric, maybe for you in biotech, is it easier to make money playing binary events or avoiding binary events?
Oh, no doubt the latter, 100%, right? In fact, we've always discussed how the best way to play any event is well before anyone else is playing it, right? When you could buy a stock 3, 6, 12 months in advance of an event and get the run into the event without taking the binary risk. I think, why is it tough to make money on binary events? You actually called me out earlier today on this. You said I had rose-colored glasses, and you're right, I do. And I think almost all of us who have been around this industry need to have rose-colored glasses, and in part because there's so much hope for patients in our business, in part because we're rooting for the companies that are trying to serve these patients well, and in part because it's a really difficult business to make money in. So when you approach a binary event and have a bit of a rose tint to your glasses, most likely, as Tess was just describing, the risk reward on that event itself is not going to be favorable, right? If all of us have rose-colored glasses and think the likelihood of success is 70% when it's really 50-50, that's a terrible risk reward. And I think we've proven ourselves that way time and time again over at least the years, decades that I've been watching the industry. But the time to buy often is 12 months before anyone's ever even thinking about that event, before stocks have really adjusted at all to whatever potential risk benefit we might have. And fortunately, we've got a lot of stocks and a lot of opportunity to do just that. So that's always been a philosophy of mine. But Tess, Josh, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, Tess, I'd love to hear your take.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it all comes down to like differentiated perspective, differentiated perspective and like level of conviction. And what are you doing on the back of that event if it goes how you want or if it doesn't go how you want? And I think that can, inform a lot, particularly, for a fund, for bigger funds, right? It's hard to just you know efficiently kind of play around these events, right? Because that in and of itself would actually move the stock, right? So you really have to kind of enter positions with conviction and the understanding that like, hey, like you might have to sit through some binaries, because if you're trying to play around that binary, you might cause things to go the other way just by being a pretty substantial percentage of percentage of that company's volume. So I think that's a key part, really, for any, certainly for any bigger fund, of like what positions to go into is like, how do those, catalysts set up? And it's always wonderful to, invest in companies where like maybe you have a few different potential outcomes, but you're like, hey, actually in several of those outcomes, there's still an opportunity to buy, right? Maybe it's disappointing to others, but exciting, exciting for us, for some way or the other.
Yeah, it often feels like moths to a flame for biotech investors, gravitating towards the binary events, and often literally, because so oftentimes you get burned by those binary events. It can be very difficult to to drive performance with that strategy. But then on the other hand, I think Tess, kind of what you're in some ways alluding to is the large size of funds relative to the small size of company valuations and market cap, and just trading dynamics and liquidity being very disconnected between running a large fund and managing an investment in a smaller liquid kind of name. So interesting dynamics in biotech always. Another interesting dynamic that we're dealing with this year and with this administration compared to the prior administration, for whom if you had asked me a year ago who the head of HHS was in 2024, I probably wouldn't even be able to tell you, but I think we all know who the head of HHS is today. And we've had some pullback in funding of mRNA vaccines. I think RFK justified that as his concerns that a monovalent vaccine that you would get from an mRNA vaccine, certainly for inhaled respiratory viruses, may actually be fodder for mutations and escape from those vaccines. And his view is that it perpetuated the pandemic. I'm not sure what, if any, evidence there is to actually support that dynamic specifically around mRNA vaccines. And then I think the head of NIH, Eric J. Bhattacharya, had some views on this as well to discuss.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess we've gotten now in the week or so since RFK Jr. and BARDA withdrew funding for mRNA research, we've gotten a couple of different rationales from the administration as to why they did that. RFK Jr., as you said, Josh, blamed it on the lack of safety and efficacy around the vaccine technology based on mRNA. And then Dr. Bhattacharya came out later and said, no, it's not about lack of efficacy or safety. It's about public distrust of the technology. Well, God, that's distressing. I mean, why would we be distrustful of the technology? Maybe it's our government that's been telling us to distrust the technology. I don't know. So that's a whole different can of worms there. But the sad part of all of this is that mRNA is a molecule, right? This is chemistry. This is a bunch of nucleotides strung together. It doesn't have a political will. It's just science. And how this technology got wrapped up into, the debate over COVID and who was right and who was wrong. And, it's just really quite sad and sickening. So, I hope that we can distance ourselves from the politics here and put mRNA back into its place, which is a tool. Maybe it's an imperfect tool in some cases. Maybe, as we've seen through the COVID pandemic, it can be a very helpful tool in others, and stop treating it as a political football, but rather, a technology that should be assessed, should be funded, should be developed, should be critiqued, should be studied in clinical trials. And unfortunately, we're just not there right now.
Yeah, Tess, any thoughts on it?
Yeah, I guess I'd just point to, it's always a little bit discouraging to see, a decision like that that kind of stems more from what does the public think, right? And how do people feel about something versus, real evidence base. So, look, there's as you said, Eric, there's so many ways in which mRNA is a tool and is used for many different diseases, many different formats. I'm hopeful that just as more applications are continue to be demonstrated, that this turns around. And I'm also hopeful that we can really maybe hopeful is too optimistic, but I would I would want for a world where decisions about funding are really based on societal benefit and a view of like what are the scientific endeavors that can really help us as a society rather than public sentiment.
It is amazing how a platform that saved the world, I mean, millions of people's lives saved, millions and millions and millions of people kept out of the hospital, in a time of true crisis, but that platform has somehow become vilified and seemingly by a fairly fringe group, but a fringe group that now has national voice and national attention, right? And to the point of it's now all politicized in ways that are so unscientific, right? There's nothing wrong with asking provocative questions. There's nothing wrong with wanting data and evidence to support the appropriate use of these vaccines, to support, the safety profile of the vaccines. I'm not sure we still have the best capture mechanism for vaccine safety. I'm not sure one is even feasible. It's so hard to, well, and look, if you get a vaccine and something happens to you the next day, yes, that's probably easy to correlate to the vaccine, although, there's also still noise because random things happen to random people all the time. Um, but if it's a week later, if it's a month later, if it's 5 years later, how on earth do you connect something, to one point in time so long ago? And it's just it's a challenge for science. And there are a lot of unknowns that we're dealing with, and the unknowns just get filled with conspiracy theories, speculation, half truths, some truths. It just makes it very, very difficult to navigate, especially when there's not a healthy, balanced, pro-patient, pro-science dialogue to advance the field, and instead it's kind of left in the hands of mavericks and conspiracy theorists to rip things apart as opposed to gently bending things to optimize them. So, like just what an odd year to be living in if you're a scientist. All right, again, like kind of light on specific news this week. So I thought we'd talk about some themes and trends that we're seeing. One interesting trend that I think many have noticed is the successful stock performance around product launches. Not 100% of them, but far more than we've ever seen before. So a lot of focus on product launches. I guess Eric and Tess, is the product launch trade getting a little long in the tooth here, or is this still an area that you think is going to be able to deliver value for shareholders?
Well, maybe I'll start. Maybe first we should talk a little bit about why this trade seemingly has worked, and then go on to maybe, if it's getting a lot long in the tooth for certain products. I mean, certain products are now, getting a little bit past their launch phase is the way I would answer your question, Josh. So if you've had a drug that's been on the market now for 12 or 18 months, people have woken up to the fact that it's probably having a good launch and have priced that into the stock. So certainly for certain franchises, I think the long the launch view is played itself out. But in other cases, for newer drug launches that have yet to transpire, I think it's still working. And I think the reason it's still working is because, one, first and foremost, pricing. We're just seeing more aggressive pricing out of the box than we've ever seen before. It's not something new in 2025. It's been happening for the course of the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Every year that passes, we price our new drugs at a higher price point. Everything is priced to be a blockbuster. It used to be that, a $1 billion peak revenue estimate was quite unusual in Wall Street models, and these days, they're all over the place. So when you price your drug at a high premium, most likely you're going to sell it quite well, especially, in the early days with those patients who are in great need. The second trend, in my opinion, is about payor reimbursement pressures. I don't think we're seeing them as much as we used to, and I'd love your and Tess's view on this. But to me, and I don't know if it's because the PBMs have been in bed with the healthcare insurers or what, it just seems like we are talking a lot less about reimbursement restrictions, about tiering of pharmacy status and copays and things like that than we really have in the last 3, 4, 5 years. And I think that means that these drugs out of the box are doing quite well. But Tess, I'd be curious.
Yeah, maybe Eric, just another, a different perspective maybe on the payer stuff is, I think it's very much still there, but I think that companies have gotten a lot better about communicating it, and investors have gotten a lot more sophisticated about, what expectations need to be. I feel like, maybe in the past there wasn't as much focus or understanding on like, ooh, what's like really going to drive growth to net, and like how important is it to be like first tier versus second tier, and like what are the programs that you're going to do, and like are you going to have a hub, and like all of these things that um maybe, well, they are so critical to a launch and to a successful launch. But I feel like in the past, there were certainly a lot of barriers, but also I think there was just a kind of lack of communication or lack of appreciation for how some of these factors, actually played into things. And I think that's really changed, right? I mean, now you have, companies in, with their, when they're talking about their phase 3 data, like they already have, some perspective about like, here's how this might be positioned and what it's probably going to come after, and, how we can, manage this on formulary. And I think that's really important. And, perhaps a part of why, why some of these launches have actually been quite good is like, they're, companies know that they have to navigate this stuff, and they have to navigate it, pretty early if they're going to be successful. So I think it's really positive to just see many smaller biotechs getting way more sophisticated, and way more specific about like, and we'll talk about the Insmed approval, but I think it's actually been pretty consistent across several companies where they've been really specific about like, here's the total population, but here's the launch population. Here's how we're, expecting things to play out on the payer side. Here's some puts and takes on how that could go. Here's like at least a framework for thinking about gross to net. Here's how to think about like the IRA catastrophic payment, payer mix, all this stuff that is such a key part of like the complexity of a launch and what you need to make it go well. I think the level of sophistication has really, really improved.
So I think the old definition of blockbuster was $1 billion product. Eric, to your point, everything's priced to $1 billion. So I think now the blockbuster definition is probably closer to 5 billion. And part of the way that companies are getting there are with drug prices higher than we've really ever seen them, and oftentimes higher than we thought they were going to be. So I guess it begs the question: what is the probability that in the next election cycle, new drug pricing becomes a target for either party?
And Josh, you're specifically referencing new drug
New
pricing as
drug price,
opposed to
right?
just
Because
drug pricing.
the industry keeps getting squeezed by policymakers to contain drug pricing, and it keeps that balloon keeps popping out in the form of higher and higher launch drug prices. Right now we have the IRA. What was the solution to the IRA? Launch at a higher price so that when you hit that discount, it's not necessarily as impactful as it might have been. But you got to imagine at some point drug prices now come into the crosshairs of politicians.
Well, I think drug prices have been in the crosshairs of
Hmm.
politicians for a long, long time, and now you're maybe making a subtle tweak to that in terms of focusing on new drug launch pricing, which you may have a point. Maybe there's been somewhat of a blind eye toward that aspect of the business as opposed to the drug price increases that companies have taken, or the disparity in pricing between the U.S. and ex-US nations that we've seen. I mean, those two concerns have been very much in the public eye and public focus, and we're obviously debating and in the throes of potential changes to the system in that regard. So sure, I think it's possible that we may also see a little bit more attention on new drug prices. But Tess, you're very close to this with your no patient left behind stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think the kind of calibration point on all of this is like outrage, right? And in the past, like we have seen like real outrage at certain launch prices, right? Or certain price increases over time where the patient community is feeling it. Physicians are feeling the access constraints that come as a result of that. And I feel like that is really a bit of a check on where these on where these where these prices go. And I do think that look for we haven't seen that for some pretty high price launches that have happened in the that have happened in the past that have happened in the past year or 2 years. So I think that politicians and I think the reason for that is the way that yes, the drugs are high priced, but they're actually like also in many ways like very closely managed by the payers, right? So yes, the price is high, but I think the utilization kind of goes along with that. So I think that companies are pretty careful in thinking through that. I can't think of any company that wants to be a kind of focus and source of outrage by patient community or payers or physician community. So I think it's a really fair point, Josh. My hope would be that companies continue to take that kind of threat of outrage into consideration
Mm.
when they're thinking about pricing their therapies and negotiating access for their therapies, so that they're really staying within bounds of like what society thinks is acceptable and what insurers are going to put on formulary and deliver access for.
Yeah, and it also dovetails into the most favored nation, the effort to get other countries to pay more, and perhaps as a quid, try to get U.S. payers paying less, which may require legislation of some form. So we'll have to see how it
Yeah,
goes, and
yeah.
appreciative that we have the no patient left behind narrative to kind of help counter some of the pressure that we may start to face again on drug pricing. So a
Yeah.
great effort and great group that you have there.
Yeah, and maybe just a perspective on the MFN stuff, because I actually think that the MFN stuff in terms of like, hey, will raising prices in Europe and other geographies, will that actually lower prices in the US? And I think it does in the long term. And the way that I think it does in the long term is it actually increases competition, right? It makes it that much easier for the fourth to market, fifth to market company to say, like, here's geographies or spaces where I can actually play and win because the market is simply big enough. Because other geographies, other people are paying. It's not just, it's not just the US. And I think that competition, I mean, we saw it, in spades in the hepatitis C market, right? Where we went from like, gosh, like $84,000 a year to like now it's like what, like $15,000 a year for like a hepatitis C cure. And that was because of like, second to market, third to market coming in and having to be really competitive on price because, the product profile simply wasn't as attractive. So I think that's kind of the longer term view, uh, I have that No Patient Left Behind has on how MFN like really does actually bring benefits to the US market just through more competition and simply more drugs competing, and some of those are going to be on price.
Yeah. All right. Well, maybe now moving on to another topic. Again, somewhat relatedly, that has to do with all these new forces we're dealing with, that we never really had to pay attention to: MFN, tariffs, um, IRA dynamics, HHS, FD.
Josh, I can't hear you. Tess, did he go out on your end too?
He went
Is
out on
shower.
there he is. You're back, Josh.
Oh, did I leave?
We
Okay.
Yes.
missed we missed about a half minute or so from
Oh,
MFN and other broad
okay.
dynamics
Oh,
to
thank you.
something else.
Oh, that's weird. Well, hopefully you can still hear me. If I drop off, just keep going without me. But I'm here. So I guess what I'm noticing is because there are so many new focal points for investors to follow, MFN and tariffs and IRA and HHS and all the volatility of the sector. Um, Investment horizons, which have always been short, have actually continued to compress even further. I get almost no interest in 2026 catalysts yet. It feels like we're kind of at the point of the year where the interest in what's ahead in 2026 should start to pick up, but I'm certainly not really hearing much of that. Eric, are you hearing it? And Tess, are you starting to think about 2026 events, or are we still all kind of so in the weeds of 25?
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of it before you just raised it. No, my call volume is similar to yours. It's very much focused on the next 3 or 4 months. And you're right, this would be the time of year typically when you'd start to, get those calls and emails saying, tell me at least about your first half of 2026 catalysts. One potential consideration, and maybe this is my rose-colored glasses on, is that folks seem to be looking to invest in nearer term milestones, including binary events right now, because they want to put more risk on. They're more aggressively positioned, positively and favorably positioned in biotech, in my opinion, having seen a very good, last 3 months of performance, especially great 3 months of performance from smaller cap developmental stage companies. So in my coverage universe, I still have a few 2025 events, and there is a ton of attention and focus and interest in some ways. more than I would have expected for a binary, given what we just talked about earlier, Josh, which is how hard it is to make money in binaries. But I think people are seeing the Cedaras and Celcuities and Abivaxes of the world, stocks up multi-fold on the back of binary events, and wanting to play more, and still having, a lot of fun with what's left in 2025. That's my take on this. Tess?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just comes back to our previous discussion. I mean, we are, obviously doing both and have the capacity to do both, which is great in terms of thinking about the rest of the year and thinking about 26. But yeah, I think what we talked about before is very true, right? When is the right time to like really think about catalysts and companies that may be undervalued well before the event where that may reveal itself. So think it's always good practice to be focused on that. I just I think you're Josh, I think it's a really good point. I mean, we've just gone through such an incredible macro upheaval where literally it's like, can you even focus on next week because you're just trying to figure out what's happening today? So I think, interested in both of your thoughts, but I think it's also just a bit of catch up where people are like, oh my gosh, okay, like maybe, tomorrow I'm not going to get whacked with MFN. Gee, let me think about some like, cool like data that might be coming up. Like that sounds like fun.
Right. No, it's amazing. Like there are so many blind spots now because we have in the way of our field of view all these other forces that are pulling us away. Um, I think there's some incredible risk rewards just out there with important events coming 2026 or beyond where the valuation of the company might reflect a 5 to 10% chance of working, and in reality it's north of 50%, and those arbitrage situations often are not sustained. They tend to close as you get closer to the data set and as investors start to turn their attention there. And so another way of like being able to drive performance without taking the binary exposure of each event. Now, on the topic of a lot of distractions that we're dealing with, um, is the topic of earnings calls, and particularly earnings calls for non-commercial companies. And they can often be fairly lengthy in terms of the prepared remarks. The prepared remarks are generally backward looking, not materially forward looking, and recaps of where the company is, often a fair amount of redundancy. Q&A section time that often you just hear analysts asking questions for the sake of being heard on a call, not really advancing the dialogue or contributing to the understanding of a company. So Tess, we'll start with you on this one. Your views of earnings calls, particularly for pre-commercial or less evolving, more or less dynamic, kind of more static, early stage innovating companies. Do you like when they do the earnings calls? Would you, any thoughts in terms of how they could be done better, if at all?
I think it's such a good point. I mean, I feel like in some ways it is just more of a distraction than a benefit when you are when you are early stage, and it's really going to be data that drives things, and why not just do calls around data? um, and what's distracting about it is like sometimes it really does matter for even like development stage or early stage companies because they may choose to like include some pretty critical data like in the earnings release sometimes. And so you kind of like have to pay attention because it might really matter, but like, ooh, like also it's, distracting because I'd say, very frequently it doesn't really matter. So, I think that to the extent that there's just, a lot of key information about like, what are investors typically looking for in a quarter for a development stage company? It's like, how much cash do you have? When are you running out of money? Are all of your programs still on track? Are you doing anything new? Right. And I think that usually that can really be encompassed in the body of a press release. And anyone who, wants more color can always take the time to talk to management. Anyone who is, but, it kind of just allows more focus on like what are the things that really do matter, which for development stage companies and discovery stage companies really tends to be data releases. And then I do think like as you get to like, hey, phase 3, and like you're getting into kind of regulatory and like planning for launch. Like I do think that it's, generally, pretty helpful to actually have like start having those calls, ideally before launch, just because there are so many moving parts sometimes with, what you have to do to get ready. And it's really helpful to, to hear that type of detail.
Yeah.
I'd be interested, Josh and Eric, in how you think about this and where you'd like to see development stage earnings calls go, if at all.
Yeah. Eric, give us your take.
Well, Josh, not surprisingly, I'll take the other side of the coin from you, and I guess Tess as well. I actually kind of think we should be doing these as a kind of regular best practices going forward policy. And the reason I do is because, from a company standpoint, it's a very competitive world out there, right? I mean, there are 500 companies, they're all looking for capital, they all need their voices heard. If you don't do an earnings call, if you don't communicate even minor updates that you've made over the last 3 months, people will forget about you. They'll assume you haven't done anything. You won't get the benefit of analysts asking you questions. You won't get the benefit of the loudspeaker in terms of sell side notes coming out after the fact. You're in danger of kind of becoming a non-entity, and that's a really, really, really dangerous place to be. Josh, even within our universe of coverage, I bet when you think about companies that do regular earnings calls, you just come off the Q2 earnings season, of course, you're probably more fresh and up to date on those companies that did a call versus those that didn't. I'm guessing, I don't know. But that would be the rationale for why these companies, seemingly are potentially using a little bit too much of our time on a daily basis with these calls. Look, I don't think anyone loves to listen to analysts spout off, as you just said, but I do understand the purpose, and I do think it allows me, as a busy person who's trying to keep track of 20 or 30 names very closely and another 30 or so names somewhat closely, keeps me a little bit more up to date on those stories.
Yeah, I mean, I think both sides have very legitimate points. I think it can be a little challenging or frustrating, in part because it's a little bit of information overload. There are certainly days where there's 100 companies reporting earnings. And we've all had this scenario where like multiple of our companies all have their earnings calls going on at the exact same time. And so you're kind of trying to rush through it and get all the key takeaways in a short period of time. It's not a great time for a chance to digest really new information, certainly about pipeline products. There's a fair amount of like wasted airtime in terms of reviewing financials that don't matter. That's always a point of, for me, that's a point of frustration because it's a point of tone deafness, right? Like if you think trivial numbers around R&D spending that we could have seen in a press release or material to investors, it is a little knock on your credibility and understanding of what really does matter. I get that there's this cookie cutter approach and folks may be nervous to break the mold. I get that folks may be nervous to say, oh, well, if we're doing an earnings call for one earnings, now does that mean we need to do them for every other earnings? I don't understand why that needs to be. Like why isn't there flexibility in the way that we narrate these companies? Why do companies have to do a call on an earnings day release as opposed to, just having a mid-quarter update around anything that's changed, that's material, to give analysts and investors a chance to ask the question and not be one of like 100 companies all coming out at the same time that can make things overwhelming. To some extent, it's our problem, right? It's not the company's problem. They're not doing anything wrong, right? It's nothing wrong with hosting an earnings call, nothing wrong with reviewing, all the minutia of financials that don't really matter. It is our problem, but it's a problem nonetheless that, in theory could be optimized by a little bit more attentiveness to companies, a little bit more realization of the bandwidth that they are consuming with long introductory comments. Maybe they have a reason for making them. I generally think they tend not to be as effective as companies think they are. Like these standard earnings calls don't move stocks. Like no one listens to the earning call, and for a development stage company, for the most part, unless there's something big and material, and says, "Wow, they really changed my mind with those introductory comments." And so there are all sorts of kind of odd and unusual embedded practices that I think are just very, very hard for one reason to shift away from. So an ongoing conversation point, especially around those weeks of earnings where we'll literally have hundreds of companies reporting that week. So all right, maybe next topic. IPO window remains closed, but a successful SPAC. Are SPACs back? What's going on, Eric?
Yeah, actually, it was, I think, Endpoints that pointed out it's been 6 months since the last IPO in biotech, or last real IPO in biotech. That was Aardvark. Josh, I know you were part of that one. And that's a pretty long dry spell. I think the longest dry spell is something like 20 months or so in the history of the industry. So we're nothing like that just yet. But 6 months relative to historical norms is still a very lengthy period. We did have a SPAC, and the SPAC is a name actually we were involved with, BridgeBio. BridgeBio Oncology Therapeutics, or BBOT. Company was incubated as part of BridgeBio and spun out about a year ago as a private company, and chose to go public via the SPAC process. It raised a lot of money. It's very well capitalized. It's got a great list of shareholders. Not that we're giving investment advice on this program, but it is a name that we think quite highly of, and they chose the SPAC route, which I guess is somewhat interesting to me. I don't know if this company had gone public via the traditional IPO dog and pony roadshow, whether they would have had as much success. I mean, obviously with a SPAC, you have a pretty narrow set of shareholders and backers. Tess, I don't remember if RA was involved in this or not, so chime in here. And with an IPO, you obviously are opening yourself up to a broader set of buyers, though lately at least IPOs have been pretty narrow in their support as well, maybe not quite as narrow as a SPAC. I do think that, having not gone through the IPO roadshow process, the visibility and knowledge that surrounds this company is a little bit lower. They have a lower profile than they might have otherwise had, but they got what they needed, which is, a terrific valuation, great group of shareholders, capital to take their oncology therapeutics forward. We may see more of these in this very choppy environment, but be curious as to what you guys are thinking.
Well, Tess, how are you thinking about the IPO window? Like, what are the signals that you'd want to see as an investor to encourage companies that in the RA Capital portfolio to test the IPO waters? Like, is it what is there a reasonable signal that you're looking for? Like how are we even going to know?
Yeah, I think it always comes down to like market demand, right? And are investors excited to put money into the company? And if enough want to do that, then hey, maybe it's a time that company should be public. Obviously, kind of stage dependent, and management team dependent and all that. But I think it really does come down to just investor demand, and really starting with your insiders, right? And do you have a few insiders around the table who are really eager to invest more and facilitate a public listing. I think it is interesting, like just what, and yes, we were, we did sponsor us back. We've also had several of our companies go through reverse mergers, or, pair up with reverse merge companies. And what I think works really well with that structure is like you agree on price, right? And you're kind of coming to the table with like, here is what the price is going to be, here is what the deal is going to look like. It's much more like a private company deal process, right? Which is what, what's a little bit easier to do in this market, right? Is a private company deal process where like you have a party that kind of named their price and they see if they can get everyone together. And if they don't, then like, hey, maybe the terms were quite right. Maybe you have to modify things. Maybe you have to, price a little bit different, and like, hey, maybe then you can go and get things done. The IPO process is like, it is a different and it's a very different process for kind of finding price, right? Everyone's kind of sitting around the table, like watching each other with like, are you going to put money in? Are you going to put it in at a higher price? Are you, is that like your real order? Or like, are you just putting in those numbers because you want to wait to like see if everyone else likes this IPO, but you actually only want like $5 million that you can, trade out? Like, it's such a kind of like, challenging, process to like find truth in. Josh and Eric, I know that we've, talked about just our approach to thinking through that, which is really starting with your insiders and kind of, you know, um, in a way compensating them for giving you real information about pricing by like, giving them the allocation that they want at, a price where you're, 70% covered by your insiders. But, all that to say, in a period of great volatility, having that like kind of lead investor and like pricing certainty, I think really helps deals get done, and makes it more like a private transaction.
Yeah. I think one of the challenges I see for the IPO window in particular is that, the highest caliber companies who, and, in an ideal world would be the first to kind of test the IPO window because they're going to have the best prospects for success, are the ones who least need to do it because they can still access plenty of capital from private investors as needed. They often have a fair amount of capital already, so there's not as much urgency for them. So we actually rarely start trying to open the IPO window with our best, which in theory would be the best way to do it because those are the companies that are likely to have strong out of the gate performance and really start to crank that window open wider for the rest. But instead, we kind of probably wind up with that middle tier, right? It's the companies that, good enough to consider an IPO, maybe not the best of the best, but they're the ones that are actually perhaps now pressured to find alternative sources of capital beyond their private investors. And so, the IPO window to open in that way has to be more of a pull, right? Like it has to be even healthier because we're not necessarily leading with our best, and so those companies that do go through have to be very reasonable on valuation. There needs to be enough investor appetite for those type of companies as opposed to the elite of the elite, which is I think where investors are starting to focus. So I'm hopeful that at some point, the IPO window will crack open just enough for the really high caliber companies to come through. I've got it's not a short list of high caliber companies. It's a long list of high caliber companies, which is what I am super excited for, unbelievably intimidated by, because I mean, if the window really does open and these high quality companies start leaping through it, we're going to be incredibly busy. And incredibly busy in a really good and a really exciting way, but incredibly busy nonetheless. So we'll see how that all evolves. We've got a few more topics to cover towards the end here. I guess Summit Therapeutics, Eric, what was going on there? They elected not to host an earnings call, and funny that we were just talking about earnings call, and now the company
Yeah.
that didn't host an earnings call caused a problem. What is going on?
Well, I guess this comes back to, the debate we just had about whether development stage companies will or should host earnings calls. Summit is one heck of a development stage company. This is a $20 billion market cap development stage company. So they're a little bit of an outlier to begin with. And, to the point you made earlier, Josh, yeah, they did host an earnings call last quarter. They chose not to this time around. That change in strategy was viewed, I think, a little bit skeptically by some. And the vacuum of information that it created, in particular, not holding a conference call, led to a lot of debate and discussion, at least behind the scenes. There were a couple of disclosures, not clinical data disclosures, but more financial disclosures in their release that were also a little bit unorthodox. So it was a little bit of a storm in a teacup this week. It was my number one incoming call volume stock in the last 5 days. And I think had they hosted a conference call, it would definitely not have been the case, right? It would have been an open forum and everyone would have had an opportunity to hear management's answers to the same questions that we all wanted to ask. But that's not the way it played out. So, and in fact, the stock was a little bit weak too. It's been an underperformer and a good tape otherwise for biotech. So maybe another reason to think again about not holding an earnings call, especially if you're as closely watched as Summit. I mean, there aren't too many, again, $20 billion development stage companies. This one has been very volatile as a story for multiple reasons.
Yeah, I guess you just can't win when it comes to earnings calls. You do them, you don't do them. There's always going to be someone that's frustrated. But thank you for that context. I think a lot of the revenue generating earning companies have already reported. Certainly from my coverage universe, it was a very mixed bag. Although I think overall it was a very good second quarter across the board. One company that did report this week was ARS Pharma with their launch of Neffy, which is a nasal epinephrine to replace EpiPens. And they're gaining traction. It's been one of those high volume, low price launches, which are always hard to execute on because it's just you just need to wait for high volumes of prescription writers. It's typically a mile wide, kind of inch deep type market, in contrast to the ultra rare conditions where you put 50 patients on drug and you already have 25 million of revenue. This is a very, very different model. To their credit, they are executing on the launch. They are starting to get traction. It's back to school season, and so that's been helping them. Tess, I know this is a name of interest to you. I got a lot of questions in terms of why the stock sold off after what looked like a good second quarter earnings. My take on it was that now is actually really the time where they need to deliver on this launch, because as you look at the third quarter revenue estimates, that they really need to step it up. And so I think investors are starting to look towards that second quarter. I think they seem to be on track to hit that number as well. Still a little bit early in the quarter, and then there are also some competitive dynamics that are at play. Tess, I'm not sure if you wanted to talk about this name in particular. I know our capital is very close to ARS.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think just maybe on the, I think this is an area where convenience really does matter, right? And there's a lot of people who are, scared of needles, especially children. And it's great to see. I mean, with we have ARS on the market, and the other thing that we saw this week was Aquestive. And they actually have a patch, therapy that you can put, that dissolves under your tongue. And this is a company that, I think they're, in discussions with the FDA now about the, approval path. They were talking about, on their Q2 update about, the timing for a potential AdCom, and if that may or may not happen. They announced just earlier this week a funding agreement with RTW, and pretty substantial offering of common stock. So we're certainly seeing a fair bit of these deals kind of happen in the pre-launch space. Maybe something to just call out that was pretty interesting about this deal is really having the the strategic funding agreement that they provided being contingent on approval, right? So I think that can certainly be reassuring for investors, knowing that if it gets approved, there is money to really support the launch there.
Yeah, excellent. All right, a couple of final topics, Tessa, if you want to cover either of these: the Insmed approval and Sarepta safety data.
Absolutely. So Insmed approval, probably one of the most, highly anticipated, launches across the sector. Brensocatib, called Brinsupri, for bronchiectasis. And big congratulations to the team here. This I think has been just a excellent case study in communicating the market opportunity and communicating unmet need. I think the success was very broadly anticipated to our previous discussion about do you get paid for sitting through approvals, but really really clean label, didn't talk about prior exacerbations, flexibility for 10 meg or 25 meg. So I think there's a lot of excitement around this launch, and we should know next quarter. So that will be obviously highly anticipated. And then I think another one that we wanted to hit on was Sarepta giving an update on giving an update to the patient community, really focused on just sharing more details on some of the deaths, and sharing more details on what's happened in ambulatory, non-ambulatory. I think really good and important to have this disclosure. I think always, I think with safety, with safety, just critical to get this information out, ideally as early as possible, and just essential to have this well characterized. So they're good to see them coming out with this now.
All right. Well, we're at the top of our hour. As always, wonderful discussion. Two of my favorite co-hosts. I hope everyone has a great weekend, and we'll catch you back here next week, or if not next week, sometime soon.